Lee, I've got to ask you because it's been burning to hear, and we've met once before, but I didn't get a chance to really go deep into this story. Um, I want to ask you about the lineage, or maybe even the origin story of you. You know, you're on paper, and even if people are familiar with you and have visited your site, your work, experienced you in real life, you know, you've been an Olympic level performance athlete. You've coached those athletes. You've started and exited companies. Now you're coaching founders on how to do that and have an Olympic level mindset. But like, take us back to kind of draw context from the version of you then, and we'll get to the version of you now.
Sure. Uh, yeah, what an opening question. Thanks. Let's not mess around, eh?
We go way back.
Let's go deep. Um, Let me think about the best way to summarize this up and keep it interesting for people. So, I had a sociopathic, highly narcissistic father. So, as a young man, I realized, at a fairly early age that I didn't want to be like my father. However, I am still the product of my father, and his sport was cycling. So I used to go and watch him race at the velodrome. And like many young men, I wanted to beat my dad. I'm like, right, I want to do this so that I can beat you. That's target number one, is beating my dad. And that happened fairly quickly. So then I started getting reward. Praise isn't quite the right word. Probably attention is the best word for him because I liked his sport. I was also captain of my school rugby team. He never watched a single rugby game. I swam at county level. I don't think he once come and watched me swim. So not a surprise that I ended up sticking with the cycling. I wanted, like all of us, I'm a young man. I want attention from my dad. Even when I knew that he wasn't necessarily somebody I really wanted attention from, it's just so deep inside of us. I wanted attention from my dad. So I was cycling at a reasonably high level, 17, 18-year-old. I was on the GB national team. I realized, though, that I wasn't going to quite be Olympic level. So I was good national level, but I wasn't good enough I wasn't going to go to Olympics and win a medal. Let's put it that way. So if I'd absolutely killed myself, I probably could have got into the senior squad and would have been one of the bit players. But I was around people with real genetic ability, and I was one level below them. So late teens, early 20s, I was messing around. I was working on the door of nightclubs. I was parking cars in the casinos. I just didn't know what to do with myself. And I split up with the woman that I was dating at the time, and I lived in her house. I moved home with my mum. And, as a 20-year-old man, I didn't want to be living at home with my mum. That's no fun anymore. So it kind of kicked me into gear, like, what are you going to do with your life? And, people that know me well probably wouldn't believe how unintentional I was at that time and how I just had no idea what I wanted to do because now I'm so intentional about everything I do. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I applied for a bunch of jobs. My mum said, why don't you apply for some real estate jobs? I was like, I don't really want to do that. She said, well, just apply. So I applied. I got offered 3 real estate positions. Went and interviewed, took the one where they gave me a car. That simple. And also said, we only employ from our company. So I was very driven I wanted to be the youngest manager they've ever had. And I made a bet with the guy that interviewed me, who was the youngest manager, that I would be a younger manager than him because, I'm competitive. So I did that. I achieved that. I became the youngest ever manager. Did that for 5 or 6 years. Thought, why don't I open my own? Open my own real estate business. Did that for 6 years. And then I was still cycling locally. And I'd also started for fun training some younger athletes. And one of these young athletes had just won a national championships. And he was at the junior European championships in Cottbus in Germany, which is a really well-known sporting ex-East European city in Germany. I went there to watch the European Championships. I'm sitting in the stand with his dad, and I said to his dad, I don't want to go back to my office. I don't want to do this anymore. So I'm now probably about 30, late 20s. I sold my real estate business. I didn't know what to do with myself. I thought I'd go into property development to earn money and do sports coaching on the side because there's not a lot of money in sports coaching, even at Olympic level, or not for a lot of the Olympic sports, especially not track cycling. So I thought, right, I do property development. Well, I sold my business December 2007, which was about 2 weeks before the property crashed in the UK. So there's no way I could go and buy property and sell it because the property was falling in price faster than you could buy it, sell it, and make money. So I'm sitting with a friend in a coffee shop and he says, just take a break. You have enough money, take a break. So I went back to training like a professional athlete, won my first national masters competition. And then suddenly people were saying, hey, do you fancy being my coach? I like being around you and you seem to know what you're doing. And that's how my cycling coaching career started. I did that. I built up to being the national team coach, created a program when I moved here to the US. They didn't have a development program. There was no way to take a young track cyclist from them starting the sport to being an Olympic champion. They didn't have a pathway for it. So we developed a program. I got outside funding. I thought I was going to do that to the 2028 Olympics. That was my goal, right? I wanted to coach a champion at the 2028 Olympics. And I'd worked at the 2012 Olympics in London, incredible experience. And I wanted to do it this time as a coach. And then COVID came and USA Cycling shut all of their programs. I also have my own professional cycling coaching business, and I'm now trying to coach all my athletes. There's no venues for them to go to. All the velodromes are shut down. And I'm thinking, what is it I want to do with my life? And I had a yearning for more impact. As a coach, I was already doing a lot of emotional work with my athletes. The first thing I wrote down on my national team script was the athletes leave this program as better human beings. The second thing was we create Olympic champions. So that was always the experience of the athletes and them getting something more than just, accolades or results. Sporting results was always very important to me. So I thought, what am I going to do? And I was listening to a podcast. There was a leadership coach, a guy called Jim Dethmer, has a company called the Conscious Leadership Group. And I'm listening to this guy being interviewed by Tim Ferriss. I'm like, that's what I want to do. At the very same time, I'm watching a show called Billions that many of your audience might know. And there's a leadership coach in that called Wendy Rhodes. And my wife looked at me and said, that's what you're made for. That's what you should be doing. And that was then the start of now my third serious career. I've been doing this for nearly 5 years now, and I love it. This is what I'm built for. I absolutely love working with people, and I'm very lucky that, my journey, having that sociopathic narcissistic father, that meant I had to start understanding myself and other people at a very young age. First just to be safe, right? How do I be safe around this person? And then secondly, because at 14, 15, I thought I don't want to carry on his behaviors. His version of being a man is not the version of being a man that I wanted. So I was in therapy in my early 20s. Not a lot of British blokes go into therapy in their early 20s. And my therapist recommended I join a men's group. So I'm in a men's group. So I've done that stuff for 30 years now.
Wow, Lee, amazing. And I think one of the things that is coming to mind that I think a lot about in life's journey is this just iterative project that life is. I think all of us are kind of shown this linear path, like go do this thing. We're trained how to do this thing. We do this well, especially if you come from something like athletics. I mean, I played baseball from the time I was 3.5 all the way till my mid-20s. And I remember that cliff fall where it was like, now what? Like, who am I now? And I wasn't equipped at the time to say like, oh, like I can be different. I can change. I can do something new. And that was okay. But hearing your story has got to be a lesson for others listening, myself included, that like this walk is just a series of iterative changes, but you've got to continue to go into yourself and feel that out. And that's my next question for you, Lee, is you mentioned the starting point with your dad and it being kind of like a rough upbringing from earliest of your memories and your recollection. What were you doing then that you recall that began that journey of going inwards? Because the modalities of men's work and meditation or therapy and things like that, those weren't until later in your life. But what was kind of like some of the earliest onset work that you were doing that you can remember from childhood?
I just stepped into a leadership role very early, both in my family, because my dad's pattern was he was cheating with a ton of women. He was absent. So he was interested in cycling and that was about it. My brother and my sister, He didn't have much time for them, sadly. He had other children as well that he didn't have a lot of time for, a lot of them that didn't speak to him. So I was kind of the apple of his eye from the point of view that I did the sport, but that was all he was interested in.
Mm.
And academically, I was pretty gifted. And, luckily I had a very loving mum who encouraged that. And I also had quite severe, or I still have quite severe dyslexia. So academically, my journey academically was a little challenging. And I ended up leaving school and not going to university because I couldn't at that time see a path. Plus, nobody knew I was dyslexic. I just kept getting this
Mm.
message: you're really bright and you're lazy. And nobody that knows me as an adult would ever call me lazy because I am not a lazy human being. I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to learn. I knew I learned differently from other people, or I had an inkling, but I didn't know why. So at that age already, I was kind of interested. I was reading different books from other people.
Mm.
I remember sitting in the playground. I think I was 11 or 12, and I was reading George Orwell's 1984. My English teacher come out and caught me reading that. She's like, "Where did you even find that?" I'm like, "I don't know. It just seems really interesting." So text heavy stuff was very difficult for me to read. And even when I was, even when I was doing my sports coaching, I actually befriended a professor, a guy called Jim Martin, wonderful guy, helped me so much, professor of physiology at the Utah University. And I would send him studies and I say, "Jim, can you explain the study to me?" And when I first started doing that, Jim would say to me, like, "Are you dumb? Like, what's going on? Why do I need to explain this study to you?" And I didn't even know I was dyslexic at that point. I just knew I couldn't read the
Mm.
study and get what I wanted from it. He'd explain it to me, and then he'd go, "I don't understand it. You understand this as well, if not better than my graduate students. Why do I need to read this to you?" And I'm like, "I just can't read it. And I can't tell you why I can't read it, but I just can't read it and get the information from it. But if we have a conversation about it, I can take it on." So that was obviously part of my journey as well as a child, realizing I was a bit different. I took on these leadership roles in my family. I was always the leader of everything. When I started doing the men's groups, I was the de facto leader of my group, even though I was by far the youngest guy in my group. But that's not always good for you. It's not always good
Mhm.
to step into that leader position. And
Right.
then I had this big yearning for, I want leadership around me and I want mentorship. And I've always
Mhm.
struggled and been searching for who's going to be my mentor because I'm everybody else's mentor. And now at 51, I still am looking for and making relationships with people to mentor me as I learn how to be a better human and how to understand the world better. So I think I was just very analytical anyway.
Mm.
And then
Mhm.
having to be more analytical to survive around in my father and that family system, and then just trying to figure out why I was different from other people. So I was always more curious and more observant than most other people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you were forced into some of that just from the experiences that you were
Yeah,
having as a child to look inward much sooner and well before your years than most are having to have that inquisition with themselves. My question too that comes up, Lee, is and you and I have talked about this once before, and specifically men, right? I mean, there's this. You mentioned that you were very logical and analytical, and that was a lot of your experience as you were trying to find out more about yourself. Um, was there a moment when you tapped more into like your emotive side, to your feelings, to the emotional part of being human? Your statement that you said before we started recording, I thought was a great one. I think your mission is now to kind of help people be better at being human. And I think that's a huge side of it. So I'm interested, like, when did that become present in your journey from where you just took us through until now?
it still is today. And by that, I mean, I'm still learning how to do that today. So, one thing I established with some coaches that I was working with myself was what happens to me, and this is where I'm different from many people, is when I'm in conflict, I emotionally freeze and
Mm,
cognitively light up. So I'm not a fun person to be in conflict with because I will out argue you. You can't out
mhm.
argue me. And often what happens with other people is they emotionally light up, they get flooded with emotions, and their cognitive ability declines. So I'm great in emotional or verbal conflict. because literally my emotional center just stops. However, that also means that, or at least it did, I'm much better at feeling it now. That also, the way I look at emotions now, and this is what I teach people, is emotions are data. Your
Mhm.
emotions are data that are giving you information about your experience in the world. And people will talk about negative emotions. Personally, I don't particularly like that term, because an emotion is an experience, and then we can put a negative connotation on that. But sadness itself is not necessarily negative. Anger itself is not necessarily negative. Fear is not necessarily negative. It's what we then do with it. And often we have these patterns that we fall into because this is what we've learned. We learned it from watching our parents or a family or our friends at school or media, and we've learned these behaviors and learned how to be. So for me, the first part was unpacking what is even an emotion, what is it I'm actually feeling,
Mhm.
and having to stop, breathe, and go, what is it I feel right now? Because I would have that emotional freeze. And when I first started working with the therapist that I worked with for the longest, wonderful guy called James Clifton in UK, absolute awesome human who now leads a lot of research and therapeutic treatment in psychedelics. And he would say to me, you got to experience your feelings. I didn't even understand what he was saying. I'm like, what are you saying, mate? Like, what do you mean experience my feelings? I'm ready. Let's go. And he's like, you're not really. There's other stuff going on that you're not yet attuned to. So I had to relearn to experience feelings.
Mhm.
And when we look at little kids, anybody who's got little kids at home will see this. Anybody who's got an animal will see this. They have a very fast emotional response: anger, fear, joy, sadness. Boom, they're in it, they're feeling it. And usually they go through it reasonably quickly if they're allowed to go through it. And it might
Right.
be 90 seconds, might be 2 minutes, but they go through the experience pretty quickly. And that's why little kids can be crying one moment and they're laughing the next. You're like, how did that happen? Because that's what's actually meant to happen. However, we train that out, especially with boys. I mean, we do with girls too. So girls are allowed to feel some things. They're allowed to feel some fear. They're allowed to feel some um, like sadness. Boys are told they definitely can't feel sadness. They definitely can't feel fear. How many of us have told, don't be a pussy? I mean, what does that
Mhm.
even
Right.
mean? I mean,
Right.
I don't even really understand what it means, but I've said that to other men, and I've experienced it myself, both in sporting settings and just generally in being groups of men. That kind of either derogatory comments about don't be a woman or don't be gay, you know,
Mhm.
and I don't understand why, because anybody who's homosexual has a tougher experience in life than me, so they're tougher than I am, and women have a tougher experience than most men, so they're tougher than I am. So I should want to be them.
I know.
So why that's a derogatory term, it's a little interesting, but it's this thing of like, you are weak, and being weak for a man is absolutely the worst thing. There is nothing worse than being seen as being weak by your group.
Mhm.
Which is why we have so much immature behavior for men. And that's how I prefer to call it than toxic masculinity. Because for me, toxic masculinity, yes, there's, we're treating people poorly, we are exhibiting bad traits. However, a lot of it is because we haven't learned how to be mature men. So I like to think of it as like, how can we take these men from being immature to mature? What's a journey that we can take them on? Like I've been through, like other men I've worked with have been through, like men in my life have taught me and been through. Um, I'm now not sure what our question was. What were
That
we
was great.
ask,
No, no,
What were
no.
we
We
answering?
we we went down a really awesome rabbit hole there that actually that's leading us to the next question of mine. Because and in our world, I mean, there's things are catching up. Obviously, like we're seeing female leaders take the helm at CEO roles in the executive suite, which it's about goddamn time. Like it's amazing, but you're working with a lot of people, probably primarily men in those roles today, if my assumption is correct. And I
Interestingly, interestingly, sorry to try, but interestingly, not. It's actually reasonably 50-50
love it,
in the
love it,
startup worlds that I work in between men and women.
love it. Well,
And
that
we
makes this
can
question key question even more interesting. because I'm wondering from your perspective, and maybe this is a great chance for you to kind of segue into that jump from athletic performance and coaching there to then what you're doing now as a high performance coach in the world of startups and business and organizational effectiveness and growth. That where we were just talking about with men, and I've seen this in my own journey in the world from athletics, whether I was in the realm with the team or locker room with the team, and the male leaders, quote unquote, there were very deficient in some of the emotional regulation and their abilities to communicate and lead from a place of safety in themselves, but then also how that translates then into the workplace. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. One, that transition from like sport to business and how you've seen people do that, and then a little bit about that difference between the males and females that you coach and calling out some of the things that are coming up in those leaders specifically in their journey, because those people are much farther down the road. They've experienced life, they've gone through childhood, they've gone through adolescence, they've probably gone through a company or two being an employee or a founder, and then they've fallen into your lap. So talk me through some of that, because I think it could be really interesting.
Yeah, for me, there's not a huge difference between many elite sports people and the leaders that I work with. The drive is the same. They're very, very driven people. And the best sports people that I work with or worked with, incredible intrinsic drive. And my job was often to get them to do less, especially in track
Mm.
sprint cycling, because you are, you know, every training effort, you are absolutely going to the max. When you do endurance sport, you never absolutely go to the max. Your effort is always metered because you can't go flat out for the distance. However, in track sprint cycling, everything is flat out. You are always going the hardest you can possibly go for every single pedal rev, for every effort you're doing, pretty much. So it's incredibly taxing on your system. Therefore, rest is absolutely vital. And the best track sprint cyclists also know how to rest really, really well. Now, one of the things I see with business leaders is still a little bit of the old Gordon Gecko, you sleep when you die, and that limits their performance. So they have that huge intrinsic drive as well. What they're not often quite aware of is, how do I rest to be able to keep repeatedly being my best? And a lot of them, now there's been this big shift, like they understand the importance of sleep and diet and health, but it's still some of that stuff around rest and how important rest is, taking breaks. And then the other part, which is the bigger part that I think you were alluding to as we're talking, is this bit about, you use the word safety, I would use the word trust.
Mm.
It's trust in yourself. So one of the hardest things I see when I'm working with parents is helping them understand that their children need to fail, because they can't build resilience without failing. However, the parents think, well, if they fail, I'm a bad parent, number one. And number two, they're also unaware, they're subconsciously unaware that, or consciously unaware that they're trying to protect themselves. They don't want to experience the pain of having let their child down. So there needs to be resilience in that parent of, I need to let my child fail. I need to not let them see that that actually was difficult for me, because then otherwise I'm burdening my child with my own stuff as well. So now that child feels beholden to keep making sure I'm okay. And there is a wonderful book about this, Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, which is a wonderful book. It's adult children of emotionally immature parents, which is a great book about this, like how if our parents aren't emotionally mature enough, we take on responsibility for their feelings, which is not what
Mm.
should happen for children. Obviously, what happened for me with my dad, but that's not the experience that children should have. And then that transfers to the workplace. It's the same thing for leaders. And I hope this doesn't sound patronizing, because it's not my intent. I see leadership like being a parent, where you are helping, molding, leading the people that you're working with to give them opportunities to become more resilient, to fail and to learn, to have opportunities to grow, to try things, and to get more resilience by doing that. And then you have to hold back and trust that you will be okay when they don't quite do it how you want them to do it. And that, for me, is the number one challenge I see for founders. So I tend to work with companies that are going through this big growth stage. I get called in when it's time to sort out leadership. So, you have the startup, they've built the thing, whether it be a product or a service, they're doing well. They're usually got funding, they've got good money, and they're like, right, we're ready to expand. Let's build our team bigger. And they're going from probably 10 people to 100 people in a couple of year period, something like that. And the founder's like, I don't really understand what leading is. They may be conscious of that, they may not be conscious of that, but everybody's saying to them, you need some help with your leadership. And it's because we don't teach leadership. It's not a subject in school. Like, we don't teach leadership. We just expect people to be leaders. And some of us are more genetically and through our childhood experience apt at that. Like I said, I took on a leadership role in my family at a very early age. But what that meant was I took on a huge amount of responsibility. I didn't take on how to empower other people, which is the other equal and opposite side to taking on responsibility. And I see this in these founders. They take on huge responsibility. They are willing to do that. What they struggle with is, how do I empower other people? How do I maximize what I can do as a human by empowering other people and multiplying it? And often what we see is they get stuck where they're still needing to be involved in things that they should no longer be involved in. And that's a tough journey for founders to come through. And it's the journey I love sharing with them. And those that make it out the other side of it, their companies absolutely thrive. Because you can only scale up if you're able to stand back and go, I need to trust that you've got this. Mm-hmm. This isn't where my focus should be. I'm the visionary. I should be looking at where our company's going. I should be looking at what pivots we need to be make. I shouldn't be making the product. I shouldn't be doing the day-to-day.
Right. I love this too, for the reason, this is a kind of a theory that I have, and I see this in my own entrepreneurial journey. The companies that I've been involved in and leaders I've been around, we started this conversation from childhood, right? And so my theory is that a lot of these things are built from those places, and potentially sometimes built from places of unawareness, right? And similar to how you pursued cycling because it was kind of a natural movement for you to regain the affection and the attention from dad, right? Like, that venture wasn't necessarily like cut out for you. It was rooted in something that was more, deep inside of you. And I'm interested from your perspective, especially as you're working through people through these like very change agent times, right? When a founder is maybe having to elevate from player to player coach, or even just a coach, right? Like, how much of that are you touting out? Like, the soil is going to be so fertile. I'm sure the triggers are so ripe, and like, you're there, but I'm guessing we're touching on a lot of the things that we've talked about already, where we're going back, or at least maybe those are coming up in conversation. Do you see that connection with people that you're working with?
Oh yeah. The best part of my work, the most fulfilling part of my work, is uncovering that emotional journey and how it's now playing out as an adult. So my understanding of the human experience is, we are born with certain genetic personality traits. My mum and my auntie fostered 100 children over a 10-year period. I got to see a lot of kids, and I got to see the nurture versus nature argument right up front. And, just anybody that's got children, you'll notice that your children all have different personality traits. It doesn't matter they have the same family system. They all have different personality traits. And studies are showing us, a lot of that is genetic. We are born with certain genetic dispositions. Then we enter the world, and the world reflects back to us the thoughts of our parents, the thoughts of our school friends, the thoughts of our family, our grandparents. You might be a really curious kid, a really excitable kid, and you want to ask a lot of questions. This was me. And your parents might go, oh, this is fascinating. Tell me more about that, and engage with you and encourage that curiosity. Or they might be working two jobs. They might be super stressed. They might be really tired, and they might just be like, please leave me alone. I mean, they might not say it quite like that, but they might, look, I need you to calm down. That's a lot. That's what you get told a lot if you're really curious, but calm down. You're too much. So you get told you are too much as a human being. So you have this wound about not being too much. So you kind of hide your light and dim yourself. And then that becomes a shield. And I kind of think of these things as these survival shields, and we put them on to get through our childhood. And then we take them into the adult world. We're not in the same family system now, but we still have this way of looking at the world going, well, if I'm too curious, people are going to give me a hard time. That might not be what happens. We might get a completely different experience, but this is the lens that we look for the world. So my job is to help them establish, who are you genetically, right? What are your genetic personality traits? So when you are at your best, behaving at your best, feeling really good and healthy, this is how you tend to behave. However, when you get activated, when you get triggered, when you're in conflict, what are the behaviors that you then move to? And let's establish those. And we give them names. So, one of mine is tyrannical Einstein. So that little kid, his way of coping with his dad was to be smarter than him and to control everything. So I made sure I had a tyrannical control and a tyrannical ability, as I kind of said earlier in our conversation about, I can argue with anyone and usually win. And that was developed because that was my protective mechanism. That's what kept me safe. Me being better than you being worse than me, made me feel safe. However, that doesn't endear me to people. People don't want to argue with people that make them feel small or stupid or tell them that they're small and stupid. So, me being activated, you don't want to be around me and I don't like me. And then I feel shame. I'm like, oh God, I wish I hadn't said that. But in the moment, I can't stop myself because that was what I learned to protect myself. That was how I dealt with my dad, and that was how I dealt with that situation. And then through the work with my coaches, it's uncovering that. And now the biggest issue for me is being afraid of being that rather than being that. So, now when I get into conflict, I am more afraid of being the tyrant than I am the tyrant. It's actually pretty
Yeah.
rare that I am the tyrant. I just might avoid conflict more than I used to because I'm like, oh, I don't want to be that guy. So that's my journey at the moment, is keep being in conflict and keep trusting that I won't be that guy. And if I do become that guy, it's okay. And I'm really good. I've had to become very good at apologizing, taking ownership and saying, I was wrong there. I shouldn't have said that. Let's try again.
I love that. I mean, that was such a beautiful way to put that. Thinking about those things as shields, and since becoming a parent and having a number of seminal experiences where I've had to reflect on childhood, you do realize that a lot of those are cloaks. They're cloaks or shields that you wear as you move through life, because a lot of us are just not equipped yet to be able to do those things. So you get the reinforcement, you get the feedback that you need, or the safety that you've created by this thing, and then you hold on to it for too long. And you went right into the next topic that I was going to call out, which you pretty much defined, but it was, the role of self-awareness and high performance. And even what you just said is self-awareness, right? You in your own journey, and then obviously you as a metaphor for everybody else that you coach and everywhere, is that when you become aware of that and you say, I no longer choose to be, or I'm aware of this type of mental pattern or physical bodily, cue that happens. Now I can say, I'm going to observe that. And then now I'm going to choose differently. But
Yeah.
that skill of self-awareness, I mean, I think I'd love to hear your points, even though, you're talking about it, real time with your people that you're working with. What role is that playing? I mean, because if he sounds like it's a pretty important role.
It's vital if you really want to be successful in life, is my belief. There's plenty of people that had, fairly wonderful childhoods. There's still stuff we take on. And I'm not looking here to blame parents or society. It is what it is. Blaming doesn't really help or make any difference. It's what are you going to do with it? And, one of my close friends, a woman who runs a great coaching company called Parlia, I was on a call and we were coaching another coach. And I'm so detail oriented. I'm like, okay, you need to do this, this, and this. And she said to me afterwards, did you notice how they struggled to take on that feedback? And I was like, yeah, I did. Like, it was too much for them, wasn't it? And she said, yeah. And she said, everything you said was right. However, would you like to be right or would you like to be effective? And this is a conversation I've had with my wife a lot. She'll watch me and she'll say, you were right in that conversation. However, it wasn't kind. So my wife's approach was always, do you want to be right or do you want to be kind? And my desire for right and wrong is so strong, I would rather be right than kind. However, that has a relational impact. And then the reframing from my friend Kari was, she said, well, how about being, instead of being right, being effective? That was the trigger for me. It's like, yeah, I really want to be effective. That's how I want to walk through the world. I now do workshops on feedback. And the reason I do workshops on feedback was because I was so bad at it. As a cycling coach, there's times I'd go up to an athlete and I'd say, why are you doing it like that, mate? Why don't you do it like this instead? You'd be so much faster. No permission. Sometimes I wouldn't even know them. They might have their own coach. And I could see the answer for them. And it came from a place of love because I really want everybody to be better and everybody to have a better experience. I never cared, I didn't get protective about my athletes, your athletes. I just want people to have a better experience and to be better. Like, I am so driven by that high performance drive. But my approach was so bad, Phil, like so bad. And I would upset people or I would shame them. And it took very resilient people to work with me to begin with. And then I had to stop and go, I'm not being effective. How do I be effective? I'm really looking to the psychology of giving feedback, receiving feedback, everything I could about feedback. And it's amazing how the impact of feedback changes depending on where and when you do it, and especially on whether you ask permission. So I teach this workshop, and one of the first things I say is ask permission to give feedback. And it feels incredibly clunky when people first try it to say, hey, Phil, I noticed something here that I think might be helpful to you. Are you open to some feedback? Or, hey, Phil, how's your day going? I've got something I'd like to share with you. Are you open to some feedback? And they're like, oh, I can't say that. I'm like, try it, see what happens. Even knowing that their colleagues are going to ask them, are you open to some feedback? People still love to be asked, are you open to some feedback? And then there's this psychological shift where you go, oh, now I want the feedback. You have something for me. Now I'm curious. And now I'm giving you permission. And that shift makes the feedback much more impactful. The other thing I like when we're talking about feedback, because it's one of my favorite topics, I'm just going to just have a little bit more about it, is asking the other person's experience first. Because then that really sets, like, what is it they're experiencing? What are they already aware of? Because there's nothing worse than pointing out somebody's faults that they're already aware of. Like, that's pain. So when the person says, yeah, I think I did this thing, or, yeah, I didn't do that. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. How would you like to do it differently? Asking them what they would like to change. So now they're starting to come back to your self-awareness. Right now we're teaching you self-awareness. How would you like to be different? Let you analyze yourself. And then if they're getting it, yeah, I agree with that. That's great. Go try it. And if they're missing it, hey, let me add this as well. This is something I've done before, or I've seen people do, or I think this might work in this situation. Do you want to try that on? And then finishing it with, what are you taking away from this? Giving them the opportunity to reflect back, check that they've got the bits that you wanted them to get. And if they haven't, another opportunity to jump back into the coaching. Oh, I think we've missed one thing here. Let's try this as well. Completely changed the way that I was able to give feedback. And I still struggle with it. And my wife will still say to me, did you really want to give me feedback like that? And I'll be like, probably not. Let me try again.
Oh, I love this so much. And it kind of takes us back to what you said a moment ago about how leadership is like parenthood. I think it's all kind of ubiquitous, right? Like, it's all ubiquitous in the sense that, like, these things apply to so many different parts of your life. And I'm actually looking out at my son in the driveway. He's drawing some chalk out there right now. And I'm thinking about moments that I've had with them where, it'd be so easy to say, hey, little man, do it this way, because I have 35 plus years on you, and this wisdom will help you do this thing better. But what I realized, and as you've expressed, and I'm realizing now in reflection real time, is like, it's not my job or anyone's job in a leadership role, whether you're a parent, whether you're in a relationship, husband or wife, husband, whatever it is, or whether you're a leader in an organization and teams. It's always your job to re-empower people with their own agency, to be the mirror for them to go back into themselves and say, wow, like, you just gave me the chance to reflect for myself and learn for myself instead of being told what to do. And boy, what a gift that is. And I've seen that. Like I've looked at this young man grow, and the moments that he's triumphed from realizing that experience in himself without me having to tell him. All I gave him was the reflection to go back in. That power, not only when you do that and receive that for yourself as you are from your wife and men and others in your life, but also to be the mirror for others to do that for them. I mean, that chemistry right there is just a giant bomb of wonder that creates a lot of awesome chemistry and outcomes.
Yeah, I love that, Phil. Look, if you're me, you're a super observant, analytical person that has the desire and confidence to be candid with people. You're also going to get a lot of feedback because you're opening yourself up to say, if I give you feedback, I'm also going to get feedback. So you have to get good at receiving feedback if you walk through the world the way I do. The big realization came for me was a lot of it is about ego. So it's two things. It's the ego of protecting ourselves from pain that we might experience when others experience pain. So that comes back to that parenthood of, how do I let go of, I might experience pain and that is what it is. And that's what has to happen in this journey. And then it's the ego of like, I want to be right. And I want to tell you how to do it. Cause look, I've done it. Let me show you how smart I am. Right. I know you don't. However, I had this big realization as a sports coach. My job was to put myself out of a job. I should be able to support my athletes to be able to analyze themselves, their performance, their race results in such a way, and be able to prepare themselves mentally for competition in such a way that if we're at the Olympic Games and I get food poisoning the day of their biggest ever race, they can perform exactly the same whether I'm there or not. And having the confidence to know that still means I have value. Like me standing next to them and saying nothing still has a value. So I'm not actually putting myself out of a job. But what I'm doing is I am enabling that person to be the master of their own destiny. Another way to think of it is you're teaching people to fish rather than giving them fish. When you give people fish, they're always reliant on you and they look up to you and like, give me the fish. It makes you feel powerful. It's a position of power. You are making them the victim. You are making yourself the hero. And there's a thing called the drama triangle, which is a great way of explaining this model for people that want to look it up. Plenty of videos online about this. And it feels empowering to you as the hero. However, that's back to being this kind of boyhood and girlhood maturity. Real leaders want to be kings. What do kings do? They empower everybody else to go off and have their journey. So it's, how do I empower first my athletes or my salespeople when I was back in my real estate days? And now how do I empower my leaders to analyze themselves? How do I empower them to help their teams analyze themselves? So not only am I coaching my leaders, but I'm coaching them to coach their teams as well. And last thing that I wanted to pick up from what you said was, the power of somebody else coming to the realization about what's going on for them. I can say to you, Phil, here's this big thing you're not seeing. I can see it. It's like this big flashing bulb over you. Why are you behaving like this? You're likely to get defensive, and it's not likely to land as impactfully as if you turn around to me and say, Lee, I've had this realization. This is what I think is going on for me. And I smile and I go, yeah, I think you got it. And I remember having that exact experience with my therapist. So I go and see the therapist. End of the first session, he's like, Lee, I think a lot of this is going to be about your relationship with your father. And I'm like, no, James, I can't stand that guy. I haven't given a toss about him since he was 14 years old. You are wrong. Nothing to do with him. And he just smiled, didn't correct me, didn't say anything, just smiled. And he said, okay, sure. 6 months later, hey, James, I think a lot of this is to do with my relationship with my father. And he's like, cool, let's explore that. No judgment, didn't ridicule me. I mean, he had a bit of a wry smile, that kind of therapist smile.
Yeah.
Eyebrows go up a little bit. He's like, okay. But, he didn't make me feel small. He didn't ridicule me. It was like that. It took me 6 months to get there. It took me 6 months to get there. And, for an ex-sprint cyclist who loves doing things fast, my work is always, it takes time. And my job is
Yeah.
to step back and let people take time. And just because I can see it for them doesn't mean that they can see it yet, doesn't mean it's time.
What a gift that is. I think that's, as I age and as we do this in our own work here at Allen Key, that's the thing that my wife and I always talk about. We talk about with our guides. It's not our job to tell anybody anything about themselves. It's not at all. It's our job to be a reflection so that they can then re-engage the things about themselves and find that path on their own. But that's why I love the word guide. I just love the word guide because I always think about a mountain guide where, this person's walked the path. They know where some things are. They know where some rocks are that you might stumble or trip, but they're just there to support your journey, and you still have to walk it. You still have to walk that path with them. And visually, that's how I always think about this topic. The the thing that's kind of burning for me to ask right now, Lee, is we've covered a lot of really awesome topics about your journey, about leaders, what you see in athletes, and how that shows up in the workforce. But as people are listening, I want to give them some kind of like concretes for things that they could do, things that people might be able to kind of engage with themselves right now. So give me, if you can, a handful of things that maybe you're using on founders or athletes in your portfolio, in your client base, and you're saying, hey, like, we're going to do this, and this is something that we can do to begin. What are some of those things that these people might be able to do and that listeners today could actually do on their own?
I mean, there's so many wonderful books out there, number one.
Mm,
Um, so some of the books that really start to help us understand why we behave like we do and the choices we make. Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Such a loss to the world. He's just died. Really sad about that. I really would have loved to have met him. Um, there's a former sports psychologist who actually had a background as a psychiatrist in very high level mental institutions in UK called Dr. Steve Peters. He wrote a book called The Chimp Paradox, which is a similar model to that. Lots of explaining in it how our brains work. So the quickest way that I can do this now to help people is think of your brain as three parts. So we have the childlike emotive center, could say, we're located around your amygdala. Then you have the executive functioning center, the prefrontal cortex, your adult part of yourself. And then you have the kind of learnt behavior computer storage part of yourself that goes back in and goes, oh, this is how I behave. This is how I behave in these particular moments. And it's how we tie all these things together. So realizing that having an emotive experience is completely normal. That system is designed to keep us alive. So the whole point of that emotive system was, you were walking out in the plains or the jungle, a lion popped out of somewhere. Your brain had to decide incredibly quickly what it was going to do. And it's picking from four things, right? Fight. So you're going to stand there and you're going to fight a lion. You're going to flight. You're going to run away from it and seek cover. You are going to freeze. So you're going to lie down, play dead, or not make a sound so that it doesn't spot you. Or you're going to fawn, which in this case would be, let me throw some meat at the lion so it doesn't eat me, right? How can I placate the threat? And our bodies are doing this continually to everything that is happening around us. And that reaction might be a microsecond where our body goes, oh, this isn't something to be a threat, really, we can pass on. Or it might be something big. And the issue that we have now in the modern world is that danger is much less lessened. We don't have a lot of actual real danger in the modern world. We do. We perceive there to be more than there actually is. Statistically, people are more afraid than they should be. Flying is a great example. Incredibly rare to have any kind of accident in flying, yet people are afraid of flying. And it makes sense. You're up in the air. They don't understand the physics of how the plane works. So it's kind of magic to them, like this thing might break. So that's a normal thing. And then you can have a different emotional response to that. So you have the emotional response, you get some turbulence. Let's take that example, right? So you get some turbulence, your brain goes through these four different emotional responses. What do I need to do? Well, most of us feel fear initially. You can flip that and you can turn that into excitement and go, I'm going to be okay. Let's imagine this is a roller coaster ride. Physiologically, your body's doing the same thing. It's preparing for battle. Heart rate's going up, cortisone's going up, your adrenaline's going up, your body's getting ready for battle. However, you don't have to have the same emotional experience. You get to choose that. So, I'm now getting to the roundabout way of what I'd like people to take away here is you will have an emotive response. It's normal. Get used to it. Be curious. What is my emotion telling me? It's data about this situation. What is it telling me? What is my fear telling me? What's my anger telling me? Anger is often about boundaries. Why do I feel angry? Because somebody isn't listening to me. They're not respecting me. They're not honoring my boundary. What do I need to do? Well, I need to communicate the boundary. Or I need to, if I haven't communicated the boundary, I need to be clear what my boundary is and I need to set a boundary. So once we learn what is it I'm feeling, then what is the choice I'd like to make from that feeling, and really getting into like, right, okay, what is the conscious choice I want to make? Instead of, am I just going to go to my computer and bring out my standard response? So somebody breaks my boundary, makes me angry. What do? I have a snarky comment. Doesn't change their behavior, doesn't make me feel better. I walk away feeling some shame and they think, who's this ass? And they haven't learned anything. I have not communicated what I needed from them. Now, if I can stop myself and go, I feel angry. What do I feel angry about? Let me think about this. Yeah, this person isn't respecting my boundary. Have I told them what my boundary is? No. Okay, next move. I need to consider what my boundary is, and then I need to clearly communicate it with them, and then I need to see if they're in agreement with it. So it's having this model of my emotional experience and then what do I want to do with it? So starting with that childlike emotional experience, bringing it into my executive functioning system and going, now I want to make a conscious choice and I want to rewire my computer. So instead of having my usual response, I'm driving down the road, somebody cuts me off, I flip them off. That's a response. Many of us have done that and it's an immediate response. Now I drive down the road, somebody cuts me off, I stop myself and I go, I wonder why. What's going on for them? Are they late for an important meeting? Have they just found out a family member's in hospital? Right? Have they just split up with their partner? I have no idea what's going on for them. What I do know is it's very unlikely to be anything to do with me. Even though I will make it personal, it isn't to do with me. How can I find compassion for them? And it's challenging to rewire that. And sometimes I still flip people off. But most of the time, I manage to stop myself and go, how would I like to be instead?
Love that. Love that so much. I've had a lot of moments recently, and this practice that you're sharing with the audience, which I'm super grateful for, is a practice that I believe is one of those micro movements that you can do that really builds the muscle for awareness. And even for those listening, a personal journey for me is when I find myself, we call it the not self state. When I'm in my not self state and I'm starting to feel some of those physiological for me, I'm tight in my jaw. I get tightness in my upper shoulders. I can feel my mental patterns, like my cycle of thought starts coming in. So I become quite aware of that. And one of the things that happens in that is that decision, like you said, and I love how you positioned it, where it was like, I can just run the program. I can run the program of doing the thing that I know kind of subsides this in the moment. And I'll do that to like get through the storm, as opposed to doing the hard thing of changing the behavior. So for everyone listening, another thing that I'm thinking a lot about lately is actually considering like the 180. So a hardcore example for me is sometimes I feel like I have to be the creator of an outcome where I have to do everything and do it really fast and do it really hard. And to do that, I feel like I have to just like plow the road, put blinders on, not talk to anybody, cave away for a day. And that's what I need, and start to shut people out. Well, for me, one of the things that I've been doing is saying like, no, like let's do the complete opposite. Let's go like play baseball with my son in the yard. Let's go put my feet in the grass. Let's go take a walk. Let's go do something completely different where I'm completely removing myself from the programming that it was. And that ability to kind of like stop and pause and say, no, like this is going to be uncomfortable to go for this walk or to go play baseball. And I'm not going to be present for the first few minutes, but to really enjoy then that experience and to get out there and feel the difference from changing the outcome from the normal programming. I love how you put that. Thinking about it as like the program that's always run, or developing new software for the response of the emotions and the experience that you're feeling. It's
Thank
beautiful.
you for summarizing what I said much more succinctly than I did. And I love that approach, Phil, of like, how can I change this? And that's what a lot of it is. Like, how can I change this up to get a different outcome from the outcome that I usually get that is no longer serving me? One
Right.
of the things I do with my clients is we establish 5 words to describe your genetic personality traits. So we are describing you at your healthiest. And then I get them to do homework on what does that mean to me? So, some of mine are play, brilliance, connection. What else have I got? Play, brilliance, connection. I kind of remember now. I'm not in my office right now. I usually have these on my computer to keep reminding me, because it's so important to keep reminding yourself.
Totally.
But then what happens for me, presence is another one. So I'm a very present human being when I'm at my best. When I'm activated, I do the opposite, and I'll go into my phone and I'll hide in the corner because I've become overstimulated and I cannot be present anymore. And what I find, that tyrant system. So if my tyrant system gets activated, what I think about, and this is similar to your 180 system, is I need to move into play. You can't be a playful tyrant. So it's how can I move into play? And if I can move into play, because my tyrant system is around my brilliance, right? It's around my smartness. So if I can move out of being, right, how do I need to be smart right now, into how do I need to be playful and connected right now? It's very hard to be a connected tyrant. It's very hard to be a playful tyrant. So once I see that opportunity and think, right, okay, I need to move. And it's the same as if you're finding yourself having those physical feelings, if you're stressed, go for a walk. Like, there's great research by the Nagowski sisters and plenty of others that show that doing some low-level physical movement is a great way of processing stress in your body. Another great way is to vent to people. The process of venting psychologically is fascinating. So what happens when we vent is we are coming from that emotional state. You've been in bed, you're ruminating, you start to get really agitated. You ring a friend up the next day, you speak to them. Well, your executive system, your prefrontal cortex, hears your own voice and then goes, oh, it's not as bad as I thought. Oh, now I see this differently. Oh, now this is how I'd like to behave. This is why talk therapy works. This is why coaching works, because you have an opportunity to vent. And then from that venting, the executive functioning part of your brain hears it and goes, that's not as bad as I thought. Or, oh, this is different. Oh, here's my choice. Or here's what I'm learning. Your emotive center just wants to stay emotive. It just wants to stay angry or sad or afraid. So talking about things is so important.
That's great. Yeah, it's funny, even for myself thinking about that. That's actually one of the first modes in which I do process. Besides physical movement, I'll process with my wife, or we'll talk about the situation, whether it's she's going through something or I'm going through something. It begins to move. I think about it in terms of energy a lot of times. Like, it's stuck energy. It's in my body. It's just stuck, and I need to move it out of my system and move it into the air around me. So that, I love that as another point that people can take away from this, from these simple tricks like doing the 180 and doing something different versus just talking to somebody about it, whether that's somebody in your life that's a loved one or someone that's a trained professional to do that.
Yeah.
Lee, I want to start to land this plane with us, my friend, because I feel like we could keep going, and I want to get people to where they can find you and stuff. But after this last question, because I'm very interested in this. So I think everybody's story is just a fascinating thing. It's one of the reasons, selfishly, why I do the podcast. I love to just get into people's journey and hear and learn from them personally, one-on-one. And the question I like to ask to end a lot of interviews is, if you could really just summarize, like, just your journey, your learnings, your experiences, the healing you've done, the growth you've made, and put it in a box and say, hey, I'm going to hand this to you, and you can learn from this if you choose. What would be in that box for someone to learn for themselves in their own journey?
We don't have to be the products of our own childhood and upbringing. We get choice in the world, and you can keep moving through the world, being a product of your upbringing and not being conscious of it, and therefore affecting other people in yourself in ways that you likely don't want to affect them. Or you can stop, you can have therapy, you can get a coach, you can join groups, you can read books, you can listen to podcasts, and you can go, how would I like to be different? How would I like to be conscious, rather than how would I like to stay in my learned behavior? Be that the survival shield, be that the computer, which is like, okay, I flip everybody off every time somebody does that. The amount of times when I first start working with people and they go, well, this is what I always do. I'll be like, why? and they can't answer why. It's just they started doing something in some way, and then they got stuck in that program. And I'm like, would you like to do it a different way? And they're like, well, why? And I'm like, well, it might be more effective. Let's give it a go. And then they start doing things differently, and people around them react to that. And they get feedback of like, something's changed with you. What's changed? And they start to have different relationships. I couldn't have relationships with men when I was young. I saw men as people I did sports with, or I went out to meet women with. And I had a desire to have relationships with men, but I wasn't a reliable male friend because I watched my dad and he didn't have male friendships and women were to be used. I had to relearn all of that and consciously relearn it. Now I have lots of very close male friends. I have lots of ritualized closeness with my friends. I have a weekly men's group that is my men's group for me, plus the other men's groups that I lead for other people. I have my own men's group. And, I have ritualized get-togethers with friends. I have a monthly meetup locally where we go out for dinner. I have a quarterly meetup with friends that aren't so close where we get together and go to Vegas or we go to Palm Springs and hang out and, do bloke stuff. And everything, you are the master of your own life. You said it earlier. You are the master of your own destiny. Do you want to drive the ship, or do you want to let the programming from your childhood or the programming from the world around you drive your ship? What's it going to take for you to stop, get off that wheel and go, I want to be different? And then who are you going to seek out to support you? And this is such a vital part of it. Societally, we have accepted that if you want to be the best tennis player in the world, you're going to have a coach. If you want to be the best basketball team player in the world, you're going to have multiple coaches. And those coaches are going to have specializations. Yeah, still in the business world, some founders are like, I should be able to do this myself because I'm a self-made person. Never met a self-made person, don't actually know what that even is. It doesn't exist because we are all the products of everybody around us and all of the learning we're taking from them and whatever we're doing. But we can be much more intentional about that. Who am I going to find? I'm the person you call if you're smarter than everybody else, more capable than everybody else, but you can't get the best out of other people. Call me. I'll help you with that. You're a founder that wants to rapidly increase your leadership team and you don't know how to get them gelling together. I love that group work. Call me. Or you are older, you're in the 50s and 60s, you have everything and you're sitting there going, why am I not happy? Give me a call and we'll talk about it. I'm not for everybody. I am for a particular type of person, and there are other coaches that are much better with other people than I am. And it's finding those people that can support you in friendships, in mentorship, and in paid, professional relationships. And I've got all of those, and I've deliberately seeked out all of those, and it's incredibly changed my life. Without that, I would likely be a middle-aged womanizer who wasn't happy and was causing destruction everywhere everywhere I went. Instead, I'm married to a wonderful wife who's a therapist. I couldn't do that without having done my own work. She would never have been attracted to me, and I wouldn't have the level of communication and closeness and love that I share with her. So, yeah, sum this up. Your life is your choice. Do you want to choose how you live it, or do you just want to be like a victim to it? Do you just want to be carried away in it with no choice?
I love this so much. Yeah, and this is maybe the thread for the conversation for us today, brother, is the idea of change, like the idea of iteration, like we started with, and that summary you just shared, and that gift in that box, your box that you shared with everybody listening, is that we're all able to change. Change is in your hands if you're willing to say, what do I want? The most important question, what do I want, and where do I want to go next? Lee, I appreciate you so much, my friend. Where can people find you if people are interested in learning about your story, your work, get engaged with you as a coach individually or personally, or as a part of their organization? Where can they find you?
Just Google Lee Povey. So my website's leepovey.com, Lee Povey on Instagram, Lee Povey on LinkedIn. That's where I tend to hang out. I'm really enjoying engaging with people on LinkedIn and meeting new and wonderful people. So I also have a group specifically for founders and startup executives called the Founders Catalyst. Come join us there. You can come ask questions. It's a free group, and we also have a free monthly Zoom call. Come there. You get the details of that. Sign up. Come and chat to me. I love meeting new people.
Love it. Love it. We'll include all that in the show notes. Lee, thank you so much, my friend. Grateful for meeting you. Grateful for this partnership that you and I are building, this friendship, and the time today on the podcast, my brother.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Phil.